Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, we're going to cover a topic that one of you guys asked for regarding the truth about men who are not so engaged or attached to social media or their social media presence. And I wanted to go over the truths about it, which most of it is actually beneficial. I think all of it is. And the research is in the description box. I know it's not accessible to everybody, but I'm going to try my best to cover what is in the research so that you guys don't miss out on very interesting information, okay? So, the very first truth about men who keep their lives off of social media is actually how we are tracking their stress, their perceived stress. So the research actually was about short-term abstinence, which I think is helpful because it doesn't mean you necessarily have to fully disengage. But people who take breaks or who not so obsessed or attached with that, what we saw is short-term abstinence from social networking sites. It specified, I think, one site, but I wasn't familiar with it. But anyways, led to significant reduction in perceived stress, especially among heavy users. This research was done in 2019, and basically we saw that that perceived stress was based on what they see as stressful, but also what we can kind of appreciate about the traits about people who have reduced stress. So they might behave less irritated or on the edge. Those types of behaviors is what we see reduce when they're less on the edge, they're less negative because they're away from social media. The next one is actually body image, which I think is interesting because a lot of people, a lot of men, at least the patients that I work with, struggle a lot with body image. There's like a fixation on the best way to take care of himself is fitness, which I think is okay. But sadly, a lot of people overfunction in that direction and it hurts them. They might lean into bad behaviors because he feels like he needs to be strong or he needs to, be perceived in a certain way in order to be equal or important to other men. And a lot of this research, the body image satisfaction, the appearance evaluation might be even better way to describe it, is there was research. It was 14 days. So I'm specifying that because I think it's important. Basically, the participants decreased screen time, and the more they decreased that screen time through those 14 days, it actually showed that body image dissatisfaction was also decreased, which we can infer based on that conclusion. At least I'm going to infer whatever they were looking at based on the screen time, that wasn't necessarily specified or even important, at least from this variable. Their body image perception improved. And the differences weren't necessarily always statistically significant. We have to understand that there's always little things here and there. Not necessarily was all of it statistically significant. There were definitely positive trends, and that's just in 14 days. I think that's why this research was really interesting to me. 2024. Even in 14 days, some of these groups that were of the participant groups had some statistical significance about their body image. And so what we can conclude is men who are not always functioning off of social media or who keep their lives off social media, they actually probably have a better image of their own body, a probably more realistic image, and they probably have higher self-esteem because of that. That part is an inference, but I hope you guys get what I mean. The next one is probably one of my favorites. Overall mental well-being is improved. This one's a meta-analysis, and basically it does not necessarily consistently improve it, but it's almost like there's small benefits here and there. This one also does have mixed results, but it's also more context dependent, which is why I think this one's really important. This one's so interesting. Okay, 2024. Basically, it's not necessarily about the frequency of social media, but more about what type of media you're consuming that creates in a satisfaction improvement, a positive affect or well-being, which I think is actually more imperative to some of these dynamics because social media is part of our lives in so many ways that it's actually just more important about what you consume rather than how often you're consuming. But the study did show small benefits in general about this. As I mentioned, the results are mixed, but go ahead and take a look if you want to. I would say based on this in general, there's a little bit of a positive affect of just not being so attached to social media, just in general, okay? The next one of my favorites as well, I think I mentioned, this one's clinical, probably why it's one of my favorites. Decrease and deduction of depression and anxiety symptoms. Very, very cool, okay? Reducing social media use rather than total abstinence. That's important, okay? Research was done in 2023. Can actually produce small but significant. So there's not a couple of the other research, it was like there's a lot of groups that maybe it wasn't affected as much. This one, it's like overall the groups were affected, small but significant because of those lack of discrepancy, if that makes sense. There was a decrease in depressive symptoms, and actually it suggested that in moderation, not eliminating, but reduction in moderation actually yields mental health benefits. Why I think this is very important, because it shows that by having some sort of, which a lot of these men who are not completely attached to social media, it's usually moderation. It shows that they're able to, function in their own perspective, their own paradigm, their variables, whereas they might use social media for some connection, maybe to look at, I don't know, videos about dogs, or sometimes people might Google something about how to fix some plumbing thing or fixing their sink. I don't even know, right? They are using it in a beneficial fashion. They might watch positive videos, penguins, dogs, polar bears, baby animals, really common stuff that makes people feel more positive because they're seeing things that typically are not yielding a negative emotion, right? However, they're not necessarily consuming things that are saying too much political stuff can be very frustrating. Maybe watching the interest rate continuously, right? Or seeing about what the Fed's doing about the rates or whatever it is. I don't know how every country works. I'm in the United States. But these are things that can affect you negatively. If you're trying to buy a house, of course, you're probably paying attention to the rates. But if you're not, maybe it's not as significant to monitor it so heavily. I understand if you're in finance and that's your thing. But most people, I'm not even sure. I shouldn't even talk about that because I don't study in finances. But whatever you think might be healthy for you might help to keep it in your life. And then things that are not as healthy, maybe reduce it a little bit. That's what I got from the research. I'm going to keep it at that. The next research, 2019, the attribute that we're looking at now is loneliness and social connection. So basically, short-term abstinence often does, this is interesting, increase loneliness and have a negative affect. However, as time moves on, these individuals actually replace that online interaction with offline interaction, which overall improves. Okay. Very interesting. So it's almost like at first you feel lonely because that's what you've been using the entire time to connect. But a lot of folks, depending on if you're going to do this or not, they replace that and they are actually able to have even more meaningful social connections. Really cool. Okay. The next one is behavioral and psychological withdrawal, 2018. Okay. This research was for a week, I believe. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I like this one too. Men and women who abstain for social media for about a week, they had increased boredom, cravings for online connection, and perceived social pressure to return. However, it did show that if they have a clear or long-term goal to improve their happiness, it can be improved over time. Very interesting. The next one is very particular to men, which is what we're focusing on today. The term that was used was masculinity. I don't have a problem with that term, but apparently it's like a hot topic. I'm just trying to get information across, okay? Basically, masculine norms and identity are affected by being on social media. And as we can probably assume, men who keep off social media tend to have a more stronger sense of their own masculinity based on their perception, okay? And so what actually ends up happening is men who use social media very often, this sounds so bad, but some people, including themselves, perceive themselves as less masculine. Like, it's directly connected. This research was done in 2023, directly connected. I mean, you can look at it, which actually may show why a lot of men might limit the use because they feel like less masculine by engaging in social media. However, it does benefit them. They actually have a stronger form of identity that actually aligns with traditional masculine roles when these men are off social media. This probably is the most important one for you guys to, I guess this is the main thing that the commenter was asking, but I looked into all of these details. The next one is the online interactions. Okay, the term was toxic masculinity. I'm actually not a fan of that term. I think it's silly, but I'm not a man, so who am I to really judge? So I'm just going to try and be as neutral as possible, but I still wanted to give you my opinion on that. So that might be, if you look at the research, that word is in there. I'm just going to leave it. I don't want to really engage in that term at this moment. But 2024, basically the research showed that among men who use social media, they actually have negative interactions with other men and other people. Like, I don't know how to even say it. Negative perceptions about masculinity in general, which ends up linking to higher depression. So basically, the implication, which you can look at the research, shows that if you avoid environments, which this part I really love, right? Avoid environments who mistreat you or make you think that your masculinity is should be rejected, or I don't know, you're toxic, whatever these words are nowadays, my gosh. If you avoid spaces where people do not mistreat you for the identity that you are as a man, right? It may protect your mental health. That's basically the best way to look at it. And I think that's positive. Like, you guys should be allowed to be who you are as long as you're not hurting anybody. But kind of an interesting research. And the last one is there is a gender difference between social media breaks. I just wanted to put this in there as a last point because I thought it was interesting. About 1/3 of men in this research, 2025, really recent, okay, report that taking extended breaks from social media tend to be for mental health reasons, and men are actually less likely to engage in such breaks because they often wait until it's really affecting them mentally. They're not thinking about it. However, it seems like they may take more benefit to it, okay? This video was not to offend anybody, not trying to offend. I just make videos just to enjoy. I'm not doing it really for much cause. I like to share information, and I love research. I'm a PhD student, and so that's why I do these things, okay? I'm not trying to pick on anyone. I just am answering somebody's question. I hope this video was helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.